Spider-Man 2 is a perfect representation of mediocrity, and I'll tell you why. It being a sequel, you'd think it would improve significantly on all the failings of the first game, and while it does in some respects, it simply stays the same in most of the important regards, such as the side quests, combat, and storytelling. The side quests this time around, unfortunately, are more of the same. I can only think of one to maybe two that really caught my attention, being the Mysteriums and the Flame missions, and maybe Howard, if you want to call that a side quest, being so short. But the rest, like the Sandman crystals, the birds, they have to fly the tunnels through the tunnels, and most of the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man missions really fell flat for me. And the reason I call out the bird mission in particular is because it's another chameleon mission. And this is a problem for me because he was already teased in the first game, and being a tease, you'd think they'd pay that off in the sequel, but again, it's really only a tease. But regardless, while the game is perfectly playable and fine as a game itself, it's not the improvement from the amazing first game. I would actually call it a significant downgrade in the storytelling regard. And if you're here really for my spoiler free thoughts, I would call it worth playing, but no, don't expect a jump of quality like from Asylum to City. Think more City to Origins. Now, getting into spoilers, the story itself is fine. Craven for me was fun, but didn't really have impact on the story besides pushing the symbiote narrative along, which in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as they nailed Venom, but in my opinion, I don't think they did. Venom was the opposite of what I personally like for the character. In fact, I think Spider Man 3 did a better job, for I don't think in most stories Harry could ever be a good Venom, as he has known Peter as established in this version of the character. He's known him for years and knows his true nature. So the fact he gets so mad over a small argument is a real stretch because he didn't even have the symbiote on at the time. And the reason Eddie Brock will always be the better Venom is because he doesn't know Peter personally, or in most cases, long enough to know him. And he really doesn't know Peter besides the black suit, and his anger is justified and amplified by Venom, and you can really see through the story how it could be misconstrued that way. But in this version, it seems Venom has almost 100% control over Harry, as it's the only explanation because he's known Peter for so long with their relationship. Obviously, he wouldn't be this angry, and the main issue lies there. It was there in the post-credit scene of the first game. It's here now. We speculated on it, how they could do it. Harry just couldn't be there, and I think this would have been completely fixed because Eddie is already a character in this game. We've known from that little teaser in the first game, and we know Eddie Brock's in here, and we know Harry could have had something else in the tank. It didn't have to be Venom. No one, it wasn't confirmed to be Venom until obviously now, and the creative director pointed this out, but it would have been a cop out, he said, and I agree, but it probably would have been worth. So those are my thoughts on the villains. Now let's get into Peter and Miles. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved Miles. I loved his game. I loved him in the first game. It's just Peter's story was the better of the two, at least this time around. And in the first half of the game, even more so. He had more to do. Peter had more to do. The story really revolves around him for a long time. And I know what you might be thinking. Yes, it's called Spider-Man, duh. But I'd counter why even put Miles here if that's your counter argument. But at the end of the story, obviously things get more connected. It gets better, not much better, but it still gets better. The characters again here are good. Peter being amazing, and same with Miles. But the chemistry with MJ for Peter and Haley for Miles was abysmal, and I don't think they should focus on those two as much as they have. And they really haven't at all, if you really think about it. But when you're developing side characters, you either put no, you either don't do them, or you put a lot of attention to them and develop them. And I feel like they could have done that really with the amount of time they had. I finished the game in just over 10 hours and I platinumed it in just under 24. And my hope for the next game is that they push MJ and Haley missions into the cutscenes, as playing them is not satisfying for anyone. And although I didn't like the main story as much as I hoped, there are good things like the boss fights, the traversal, and the graphics. The boss fights themselves are pretty good, even though I think the combat is dreadfully boring. That's at least 50% of the game, and I personally don't like it. But the boss fights are fun, especially Craven and Venom. I think that's the main issue with the game. They focus on spectacle more than good story or overall satisfaction, as after something huge would be something equally as boring, such as bike riding with Harry, going through the gym, or walking through the foundation. But traversal, which is another high point, was a bright spot for this game, as in the first. But the addition of web wings and air tunnels and slingshots can only make it better and more engaging. And similarly, the graphics were great, even on quality. I couldn't even notice the 30 frames, which is a big thing for me. I can never play on 30 frames. PC snob, I know, but I didn't even notice it. But that's the end of my compliments. And the end of the game is a whole nother beast, which I won't get into, but briefly, I 100% of the game, and there is absolutely nothing to do besides fight crime as Peter. And even as Miles, you can only redo the Mysteriums. And I think it should be a crime not to have New Game Plus at launch. But with that being said, I gave the game a solid 5.5 out of 10, which is just above average. 5 is average for me, so I think that'll do it. That's my thoughts on Spider-Man 2. I know it's controversial, but just my thoughts.